Hello all, I'm Sally, and in today's video I will be talking about API versioning in .NET, of course. I'm not gonna tell you what exactly it is. It is because I have an article on Medium.com, which you can find the link below in the description below. And if you don't know what the API versioning is or how to use it, please give yourself a time and read it and come back to this video. In today's video, because I will be mentioning and how to implement it. And also the implementation will be kind of piece of cake for us. It is because if you remember the previous video I made, I was talking about the exception handling and implementing it too easily with the configuration as well. And in today's video, I will be talking about API versioning implementation by using the same client. This is the open source project. If you watched the previous video, I mentioned about that one as well. So this is the open source project that I created, mostly using it as an extension in our web API projects. Exception handling was one of them, and in today's video, and today's subject is API versioning. If you just click the link and come to API versioning README file, you will find all the instruction, installation and usages as well. We will start with installation and then I'm just gonna show you how to use it. So first thing first, I'm just gonna create a new project. It could be web API. It should be web API. It is because API versioning and API versioning web API. It doesn't matter what it is, just create. We have a basic project from scratch. I'm just gonna start from scratch because I want to show you how easy to implement it, and there is no magic code behind. So doing everything just in front of you. We have weather forecast, which we don't need those ones, and you too. Sorry, I'm just gonna clear it up a bit. And this is get, but it is just gonna turn back a string and return okay. I assume you already read this article I put over here and know what the API versioning is. On the controllers directory, I'm gonna create a v1 folder and also v2 folder, and I'm just gonna move this over here and change its name test. Maybe it is now test controller, and also it is an API controller. Okay, when you call this, it returns okay, v1. I'm going to create another controller on the v2 folder and name it test controller again. It will have the same method, the same syntax, the same route, and it actually has no route, but let's give them a route actually. So route, maybe get version, get message, let's say. I'm gonna do the same because I want both them, and also needs to be controller as well. And okay, we have now two controllers that has the same function with the same route, get message, and the first one returns v1 and the second one returns v2. I just didn't implemented our API, our client yet. So let's come over here and copy that one and go to NuGet package and browse for the file, for the package, and install it. Once I install it, it says you can either use that way, which has no parameters, or you can customize it by doing that. I'm just gonna use that one first. Let's copy over here and program over here, paste it, that's all. It also goes to using block when I paste it. Now I implemented it. I'm just gonna show you how it works, how it behaves when we implement it in default, and you will realize something. It says failed. API definition, blah, 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 blah. If you go to detail, all the details, it's just gonna say you have task controller over here with the same route, and you have task controller over here with the same route. I don't know which is which. So in this case, we need to specify API versions for those ones. For example, API version. I need to come over here and say this controller, this API controller is totally what can be used with API version 1.0, which means this is gonna be v1, and I'm just gonna copy it and paste it over here, and this is gonna be 2. Now in this case, we don't expect Swagger to throw an exception or says I'm confused, I don't know which one is which. As you just see, it knows what it is. But API, yeah, it is the API versioning, and it is asking for query parameter. So if I come over here and say v1, I'm asking for, and if I hit the endpoint, it returns v1 to me. Let me make it bigger for you guys. It says v1. If I just come over here and make it 2, it's again. And if I say v5 even, it is just gonna say I'm returning with 1. So let's say test over here. Okay, now what I see is there is no validation for that one. This is the first thing. And also I was just passing wrong parameters in purpose. So if I say 1 instead of v1, you will see 1. So the result is for v1. But if I make it 2, you're just gonna see v2 or 2.0, I can say. It is just gonna come again with 2. So if I put something wrong, it returns 1. It is because the basic implementation with that one, if we just get into it, we are gonna see there are a couple of parameters in it. So default API version is 1.0, which means if you don't provide any API version or provide something that it doesn't have, the API default version will be 1.0. And it is just gonna assume default version when unspecified. So if you don't specify anything, the default version 1.0 will be over there for you. And the query string parameters will be X API version, as we just, what is it? See over here, yeah. This is the query string parameter. And as a way to read the parameter, the query string API version reader will be used. But also, we are able to specify those. So I'm just gonna come over here into documentation and see. So I can provide those parameters. Those for report API version means if I hit this endpoint by, let me just show it to you actually what it is. And I'm just gonna copy that one and switch to Postman and say, okay, API test my controller gets message and X API version equal 1.0 or 2.0. When I hit this, you see, but on the header, API supported version says it is 1 and 2, which means this API endpoint, this API test / get message has 2 different API versions. It supports 2 different versions, API version 1 and 2. We will examine this later as well. But reporting API versions back means that one. So enable API version explorer, which will be meaningful when we implement the Swagger implementation for extensions, which will be next video probably, or the other one, I'm not sure about that, but I will be making a video about that too. But I'm just gonna skip it for later. And this is the default version. So for example, if I make my implementation by using the configuration, for instance, default API version is 2.1 instead of 1. So if I now and hot reload it and give it another chance, so I'm just gonna put something that doesn't exist. It is probably needs to rerun because it was injecting it, so the hot reload didn't work. Oh, yeah, if you try to specify that one, you need to specify what way are you gonna read this version from. So for example, query string parameter, and the parameter name is still the same, or it could even be different. So for example, an API version, it doesn't matter what it is. When I hit it, now we have it. Now you will see it is changed. API version, not X API version. I'm specifying something it doesn't have, and as you see, the response, the default version is 2.1 right now. Sorry, 2.0 right now. So I'm seeing this message. Okay, what else do we have? Reported API version, as I just mentioned to you, and assume default version when unspecified. So for example, when it doesn't specify, I'm not gonna assume that it is 1.0. And let me rerun the application. So now I am heating, and I'm not heating. I'm just gonna heat it from here so to see. Okay, what does it say? It is bad request, API version unspecified. If you don't provide any API versioning when this property is false, it is just gonna throw an exception. It says an API version is required but that wasn't specified. So if I specify that with the new name, you will see the message back. Okay, and as I just mentioned, we can read this API version from multiple places. For example, I can read it from query string, or I can read it from header. So in the header, I'm just gonna say header API version. This is my header name, parameter name, header key. And when I hit this, you will now see something else on the debugger as well. Instead of query string right now, it is now header, and this is the key. Now I am providing my, let's say 2 API version. When I hit this, it returns 2. When I hit this, it returns 1. So this is again working. I'm gonna create something else over here, which only, let me just check edits over here and copy, make it get message, not get message, set message maybe, or get version. Now it doesn't matter actually what it is. Get another message. I'm gonna name it like that. So the method name should be, and this is another message. So what I'm gonna show you is that API version 1, this controller has API version 1 and has 2 methods, which API get message and get another message, whereas the test controller, the other one, has API version 2 but has only 1 message. So when I hit this, we are gonna see, okay, this is the get message, and name it and call it, okay, see it. When I just run that one with 1, for example, you will see another message. Even though I am specifying 1, it returns me that one. Sorry. Actually, yeah, this is the correct one. Sorry. I'm not gonna specify it with 1, but with 2. Yeah. If you are using API versioning, one of the things that you need to be careful about is that it says unsupported API versioning, because you specify with 2, but API controller with 2, that one, doesn't have the action method you have. So it is only be able to, you will be only be able to get another get another message with one. So if I come over here and say, okay, get another message with, let's say, one, when I hit this, two, what was the name? We change it to header, right? So I'm just gonna come over here and say header API version, and the version is 1. Now I am hitting that. If I just come over here, if you realize that it still says get another message can be used with 1 or with 2. But if you hit by providing 2, it is just gonna say get method not allowed, or just something like that. It is because you can specify not only the controls itself. For example, this, when you put the attribute over here, it affects all the actions under this controller, or you can either use it by passing this over here. So I'm just gonna stop this. If I would say this method is for v1 or just v2, now we are gonna be able to, let me remove that one. Now we'll be able to see the get another message with 2 as well. So get another message, try it with 2 and execute it. Yeah, you will see it. So instead of actions itself, it returns back the controller supports. What controller supports? This controller can be worked with 1 or 2 either. And the next thing I'm just gonna show you, it is the another reading method. And this is different than the others, to be honest. And this is add URL segment API version reader. So you don't need to specify any parameters. It says URL segment. Let me use that one again. True and 1.0. So back to the default. So URL segment default, if I just disable those and run that one, see how Swagger behaves when we are using the URL segment. If I just come over here, it doesn't ask me to pass anything. When I hit it, it returns v1. If I just come over here and execute it, it says, okay, this is another message. But how I'm gonna pass the parameter to you to be able to specify the API version or the data I'm asking for, right? So I don't specify it over here. It is because we said that we are gonna use a URL segment API version reader, but we didn't specify it how and where we are gonna get it from. So if I locate over here and in the route section, I need to say I am expecting your API version in here, but where exactly? So I'm just gonna try to add another route for that. Now I'm just gonna say, okay, I'm not gonna say API and blah blah controller blah blah something. I'm just gonna go an API version config, but which config was that? An API versioning config probably. And not config. Yes. On the API versioning config, we have a couple of constants over there. I'm just gonna locate there. So we are gonna see, we are now seeing API and something that I don't know, and controller, which I recognize. That was one, and this is something new for me. So when we are using URL segment, we need to specify where and how are we gonna get this parameters. And if I use, let's say, controller route, which is basically that one. So if I hover the mouse, yeah, you will see API, V version, API version, and controller. And I'm just gonna comment this out. and do the same for the other one. And yes, and now I'm just gonna run it. This time Swagger recognized it because the URL parameter, the URL route changed for controller. So it says v1 v1. It is because of we didn't implement API versioning with Swagger. Swagger doesn't know what the other API versions is, so it shows only v1 as default. But if I hit that one, you will see the message one. So I'm just copy that and come and paste over here and say, okay, give me the data. It says v1. I didn't specify any header parameter or any query string parameter, but I specified over here. When I change it to 2, now I will be able to see the v2. It is because I specified my API version in not query string parameter, in URL segment. So as a difference, and let me just come over here, as a difference between header query and also URL segment. If I'm using URL segment API version reader, I need to specify it in API route. By the way, a route, a controller can have more than one route, for example, like that and like that. Or our API version reader could be used in both. I'm just gonna make it, let me just switch it to that one. So basically now I'm saying, I'm just gonna pass you API versioning by using query string and not or. I mean or actually, not and, but yeah, we will see it soon. And or I can be sending it by using an URL segment reader. So now I'm just gonna execute this application again. And now I'm seeing something else on the Swagger. It is because all our controllers has 2 different routes. The first one without an API version URL segment, and the other one is with one. So this is the one. If I specify that from query string, it says, I'm just gonna say 2, it returns 2. If I just come over here, call that providing nothing because it is already over here, and when I hit it, it will be 1. So I'm just gonna come over here and copy that one. And I will ask you a question. Now I am using query string API versioning, right? So hit this v2, okay. What if I provide both? So test, not over here, over here. So version 1, test, GetMessage, API, and 1. If the both are same, so 1 and 1, hit this, okay, 1. When both are 2, for example, 2. When both are 3, which we don't have, but test it, it says, oh, unsupported API version, that's okay. What if those are different? For example, URL segment 1, v1, but query string parameter is v2. When I hit this, what we expect is v1. Why do you think it is v1? I'll just switch it over here and show you the difference. When I changed that one false and re-execute the application, and Postman, when I hit that one, it still wants. Okay, I'm just gonna come over here and change this one with 2. Says okay, and hit that again, it still says 1. Is it because of this, you think? So 2 and 1. What do you think? What do you think is gonna happen? Hit, it says v2. Oh, now we see some priority over here, right? It says v1, I mean, it is, we are using URL segment over here and then providing another parameter. So in here, we are using URL segment route already, no matter what parameter, what else parameter we are providing. If it is URL segment already over here, it is just gonna use it. It is because it reads the API version from URL segment and then try to read those one. If we have over here, this is doesn't matter. But what would happen if I don't use the URL segment one, but if I use the header one? So I'm just gonna do the same name. Now I'm just gonna do the same. I'm gonna pass two different parameters by using header and query string. And over here, now we are not using that one. If I hit that v1, it is because I'm using the query string one. And header API version and still one. When both same, it's okay. But I'm just gonna change the header one with 2. Now, what do we expect to see? If I hit that one, oh, it says ambiguous API version. It is because the system supports 2 different API version reader, header and query string one, but the versions are different than each other. It doesn't know which one it needs to use. So it says, okay, we have API versions 1, 2, or blah, 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 but ambiguous API version. It wouldn't be matter if I set that one true and that one 1. So rerun it. Do it again. It still says ambiguous API version. Okay, now we understood that if we are using both API version header or query string or something else, we are not allowed to provide 2 different API versions. Okay, it needs to be the same when we call it. But when this happens, for example, that one happens, you see the output over here, it says ambiguous API version and blah 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 something. I'm just gonna show you something else that you can do. Opt and says use error response provider, and it asks you to provide something T, error response type provider. So I'm just gonna locate it over here, and it says, okay, this T needs to be error response provider. This is nice. So in this case, I will be able to use a response provider when any error, any exception occurred. So I will be implementing it over here. Maybe this is my provider, not public, class provider, and I'm just gonna implement it from that one. So it says, okay, I'm just gonna give you that parameter, and I'm expecting an action result. So let's say return object result. It asks you to provide something else, so new one over here, and it says give me a value. So I'm just gonna create some dynamic object over here, dynamic object, let's say new, and what do we have? Message. In context, we have message request, which is HTTP request, and message detail, and also the error code. I'm just gonna pass this one back. So I'm just gonna put it over here instead of providing something new, and I will be using that one either that way or cut it over here and pass it as a generic type. It will handle it, and I'm just gonna use that one. So when any exception occurred, I'm expecting that one will work. And now run this again. Okay, now I'm just sending 2 different parameters and send that one. It says now something because it wasn't able to generate serialize that one because it has type in it. What was the exception? System type. This is using system text JSON, and it is not able to serialize type object, And instead of that, I'm just gonna create a new object over here and says message from context message and detail from context detail, and also error code from context error code. And instead of this context, I will be passing back that one. So rerun again. And it is now working. Okay, when I clicked, I see the exception. I see the result as I just reshaped it. So message and details and error code. The error code is ambiguous API version, and the message is something else. And as I'm able to customize that one as I just want, because I have context, request, I don't know, body, content length, content type, everything I need over here I have. So I can customize the response when any exception occurred when we are using this API versioning, because I provide two different versions and it throws an ambiguous API version type error. So now I just show you how you can implement, not only how you can implement, but also how you can customize the API versioning. You can either use the simple implementation, the default implementation, query string implementation as default, or you can customize it however as you want. And as I just said, if you read that article, you already know what the API versioning is and how to use it and why to use it. It is quite big one actually. It's very informative. And the next video probably will be about validation or Swagger. When we are implementing the Swagger extension methods, we will be able to use the API versioning integrated with Swagger as well. So when we are using Swagger UI will be able to scan every API versions over here and implement it in the UI page. You will be able to see it over there. And so I will be talking about that API versioning again when we are implementing the Swagger or Open API client. You will see the details over here. And yeah, that one, Open API. And this is all I'm gonna talk about today. So I will see you in the next video. If you like the video, please click the like button over there. Don't dislike. And if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe on my channel. And if you want to be notified by YouTube when I publish the new video, please make sure you click the notification bell. So I'll see you in the next video.